Welcome to the TBR webinar series. Today we're going to be discussing blockchain in the context of digital transformation and IT services and cloud and emerging technologies. Transforming the economic engine one block at a time. I love the title. So before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box and we will address them at the end of the webinar. We typically wrap up the presentation after about 40 minutes to leave plenty of time for Q&A. One of the frequent questions is, can I get a copy of the slides? After the webinar, you will receive an email with a replay link, as well as a link to view and register for upcoming webinars. You can respond to that email or reach out to us directly when you see our names and our email addresses in order to get a copy of the slides. And so who are we talking about here today? So 1 second. There we go. So we're going to be coming at you today from 4 different perspectives. My colleague Geoff has the most experience among us in looking at the technology space as a whole. He brings an understanding of both the foundational elements of doing business in the IT world and also he's growing an ever-expanding appreciation really for emerging technologies like quantum computing, like blockchain, and more. Evan Woollacott is part of the cloud and software team, part of the services team, part of the digital transformation team, and he brings together views from all those different kinds of vendors and all those different business models within the technology space. Boz leads our digital transformation practice, and he looks at blockchain within the context of digital transformation engagements, particularly from the perspective of the IT services vendors and the strategy and operations consultants. And I'm trying to sort of bridge all those worlds, which is another way of saying I have the luxury, along with Geoff, really, of taking that 10,000-foot view, while Evan and Boz are more into the specifics around the various vendors and their business models. And if you're new to TBR and you're wondering why I keep saying vendors, that's because that's how we look at the world that we cover. We try to understand individual vendor strategy and performance, and then we place them into context in the market that they play in. So with that, what are we going to cover today? We're going to start with some basic trends and sort of the basic state of the market, state of play for blockchain. We want to share our thinking around the multi-enterprise business network framework, because understanding that is essential to understanding blockchain adoption. Next, we'll walk through some of the use cases, get into vendor-specific examples and developments, and then we're going to finish today with something we've never done before on one of these webinars, something new. Each one of us is going to get up on our own soapbox, and we're going to present for at most 2 minutes, that includes you, Geoff, of sort of informed, maybe misinformed opinion on blockchain. So it'll be sort of an around the horn, type event at the very end. So stick around for that. And with that, let me turn it over first to Evan.
Great, thank you, Patrick, and hello to everybody on the line. So the multi-enterprise business network framework, what do we mean by that? As technologies which kind of underpin the digital economy, like cloud, mature in the market, it has become increasingly more difficult to understand how vendors must design and enable the growth of the ecosystems which are going to underpin the commercial success of technologies like blockchain. So, more simply put, while not everything about business is technology, every business now has to leverage technology everywhere. So what do we mean when we say that? In thinking about the historical technology or ecosystem value chain, the alignment was fairly clear. From semicons to legacy software to the professional services continuum, the path to market was more digestible and the required technologies or services partnerships were more easily defined. As a result, the business value chain strategies such as go-to-market, resource management, or financial strategies, areas which have been the cornerstone to TBR's analysis for about the past decade or so, were also more clearly defined. In comparison, though, the birth of cloud and subscription pricing and the resultant vendor strategies to transform their legacy business models to compete in the future provides to some degree an indication of what the overall impact or transformation which will be required at the ecosystem design level going forward. Specifically, with digital technologies, ecosystems have grown to include a wider variety of entities of vastly different backgrounds, some of which are simply only required in the context of providing the ecosystem with data. A dynamic we saw play out dating back to about 2016 when IBM acquired the Weather Channel, where they subsequently articulated at events like Amplify how this data can now be used within marketing assets to improve client campaigns by using local weather data and AI for real-time proactive recommendations. In contrast, the emergence of IoT required new partnerships between asset OEMs and semicon and connectivity chip providers like Qualcomm and Intel, as these OEMs sought to connect their assets to feed equipment data ranging from temperature, vibration, and speed to the relevant OT systems like MES, which underpin facility operations. Additionally, and more critically from the OEM perspective though, it was about gaining the ability to leverage the data internally in R&D to improve the asset design and then provide their clients with greater ROI as the uptime of the actual machines improves. So while the IoT, and more specifically IIoT market is maturing, it has its own litany of issues related to business model evolution, data requirements, ecosystem nuances, and so on, which TBR plans to explore in the new IIoT market landscape, which we'll set to publish next month. Going forward, though, I think it'll be pretty interesting to monitor how both emergent technologies like blockchain and more mature technologies like IoT give rise to new business model considerations for ecosystem participants across this industry landscape. For instance, how exactly will data participants in a blockchain-enabled ecosystem, such as a gas station feeding information to a connected vehicle's display, be compensated? How will a technology vendor aiming to build a connected vehicle ecosystem incentivize those participants to join their platform over a competitor's offering? With blockchain, we hear of numerous potential applications which promise cost savings, increased transparency, and more efficient and secure ways of conducting business. But we fail to see today any substantial viable commercial offerings that are disrupting the market. Instead, we hear of successful pilots which typically do not scale beyond that proof of concept. For instance, with the IBM partnership with Walmart, I think in 2017, they explored ways of using blockchain to innovate cold chain storage and shipping processes of pork. We heard of the ROI, but why then didn't it scale? Because scale demands that ecosystem buy-in from a wide variety of participants. In this example, you need supply chain entities, farms, meat processing facilities, and then the end retailer who sells to the consumer to kind of tie into this. These design requirements are entirely predicated on the use case which the blockchain platform is enabling. So that is the challenge which the framework developed by TBR's digital practice is really aiming to bring clarity around. These frameworks are all designed to build atop of each other, creating clear linkages between one layer to the one beneath it. So, specifically, to understand the design requirements of something like blockchain, an emerging technology, you must first start with the industry in which it will be deployed, as that defines the participants who are going to be relevant in that setting. From there, you can begin to understand the user personas of the industry, be it front, back, or middle office, as they all have vastly different needs, pain points, desired outcomes that they're trying to enable with an emerging technology. Once their needs and outcomes are understood, you can then understand what the highest value use cases will be that the technology can enable. Far too often, though, we're seeing technology providers build technology, though, for technology's sake. But by building solutions with the actual end users in mind, you identify the largest opportunities, which provide that tangible ROI to the prospective client and then increase the likelihood of adoption. Only then, once you understand and define that use case, can you begin to identify the key ecosystem participants who will be required to enable that desired outcome for the client. Blockchain is a great example of just how complex and convoluted digital ecosystems will become in the future, especially in the context of something like a horizontal application like supply chain transparency. Later in this presentation, we'll try to bring some clarity to that dynamic by using ports as a case study for a blockchain ecosystem, as ports are almost a hub to the global economy, and advocates of blockchain today feel that technology is well positioned to be that enablement platform of tomorrow's digital economy. And with that, I'll pass it back to Patrick for a polling question.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Evan. And I think it's really important to understand that is the mindset that we're coming into all of this research around blockchain, around emerging technologies. So here's the first polling question. When you think about a blockchain, do you expect adoption to accelerate with new novel use cases? Do you expect faster adoption where blockchain enhances legacy processes? Do you see no change in the pace of adoption, at least in the near term? Or do you think there's going to be significant differences in the pace of adoption based on industry needs? And hopefully everybody's answered by now. So I won't be influencing the outcome too much, but I do think it's really the first one. It's those new novel use cases that are really going to fire things up around blockchain. And I think this year, and maybe I'm previewing what I'm going to say at the end of this presentation. But let's see what the results are. And looks like we went too fast, and we only got a few votes. And so we'll surprising. So sometimes the technology doesn't work for us, and I'm going to guess this is one of those cases. Where the polling question didn't work. So hopefully the next one will. But in any case, let's turn it over to Geoff now to walk through sort of his take on the key trends that are happening in blockchain right now. Again, sort of setting us up for the discussion on the use cases and the vendors. Geoff?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, and thanks, Ev. That was it really crystallized the idea that the ecosystem, and blockchain's great for this because the ecosystem is a distributed sort of business and interaction, and it's got to tie down to the discrete businesses who really are, you've got to answer within the ecosystem the discrete business model participant question of what's in it for them or what's in it for us. So when you're doing that and you're getting down into what I'll call general ledger rather than distributed ledger, there's really only the three pillars of you're trying to say, do it more efficiently or cost optimization. You're trying to generate growth or more revenue. And those used to be, back in the day when I was taught this, the only ways you looked at it. Fear or greed were the only two things that you had to kind of try to take a look at. But risk has elevated so much that it really needs to be its own independent leg of the stool. And within that, you've got to map those three elements across the back office, the front office, the middle office, or how IT can enable it, and then the C-suite of the decision-making process. And this has been a big challenge for tech that had just gone into sell speeds and feeds to IT rather than business outcomes. That's all around there. But when you go to blockchain, cost is the clear and compelling lever that's often mentioned. We've heard of use cases where what they talk about is removing human error correction. The idea that where it's an electronic order, you don't have anybody rekeying, you don't have mistakes made, that you can cut that non-customer facing or non-innovation manufacturing production piece by as much as 90%. So that is a big, big number. That is generally the compelling argument. Now, calibrating the revenue side is a bit more nuanced. It's on par with businesses who had web front-end ordering portals, but then they just took that information and manually rekeyed it. So where we heard it, it was interesting in a discussion with a gentleman who was buying multi-million-dollar capital assets, and he couldn't get the kind of order tracking that you can receive when you buy a $10 computer cable from Amazon, and you can have it tracked up to the minute as to where it is and when it's going to arrive. And that's the kind of customer-facing value that could be an impact on revenue that can be baked in through a blockchain-enabled solution. Now, the one I find the most fascinating is risk and risk mitigation. I mean, it's always been important from that backward reporting compliance that you tied your books off correctly and you weren't going to get fined by Uncle Sam for a mistake. That we all, that's what we thought of as risk. But risk has really elevated, and in a recent thing, where we asked the CIO coming out of the pandemic, what are you looking at? Where are you going? And he said resiliency was had leapfrogged ahead of cost optimization and revenue growth, that they were just trying to make sure they were safe. Now, that boardroom implication, it's really hitting with emerging data privacy laws. We've seen it with the GDPR, all these different ways. Now, we will see all sorts of different data privacy laws coming from our 50 states, and then with the federal overlay, and then you're going to have the, so state to state, nation to nation, and EU community or different communities. There's going to be all sorts of overlapping functionality and changes. If you can automate that in the so-called smart contract aspect of blockchain, you're going to dramatically cut and minimize your risk. because that's basically what it does. Blockchain strips the labor out of the error correction, checking, governance functions of the business. And it's going to be applied going forward with anticipated policy changes. The greenhouse gas emissions, SASB rather than FASB. Patrick will be touching on that as well. That's one piece of it. We've seen through the pandemic the problems of supply chains. We've seen it in terms of drug efficacy based on temperature controls and where it was and the traceability of that. And then lastly, of course, is going to be that consumer protection around personal privacy, whether it's a financial perspective, a medical record, or anything else that really needs to be addressed. So this is the kind of a click down from what Evan mentioned as the multi-enterprise business network, because it's the what's in it for X. And it maps across those three levers. And what you may well see is there'll be some folks that are going to be anchored participants in getting that ecosystem established that won't have a lot in it for them in what I'll call the Horizon 1 and Horizon 2 applications, to Evan's point, getting gas stations enrolled, getting parking lot attendants enrolled so that you have a network. And that network to begin with will be used by just the owners of the cars. But the Horizon 3 underpinner of that could be somebody who wants to set up a fleet of autonomous vehicles, and they need that infrastructure in place for the moonshot that they're going after. So, like distributed ledger technology needing to link to the general ledger, the ecosystem value chains, value propositions have to tie to the independent customer, the aspirations. That's really why the translation layer at the core of how we evaluate the various blockchain initiatives is critical, because we're taking the ecosystem and we're tying it off into the vendors. And with that, I'll turn it back to Patrick and Boz.
Thank you, Geoff. And kind of like shifting gears a little bit, kind of almost like a continuation of that multi-enterprise business network, a little bit more zooming in on use cases. As Evan mentioned, the digital practice, TVR digital practice, we use the use case segmentation, really provides that visual representations of how we approach the applications and the use cases across the different industries, and the segments that to offer more of an intertwined view of the blockchain technology and its impact participants' business models. So we certainly, want to highlight some of the use cases here that we provide in the report, with a couple of them, like supply chain and financial services functions being kind of some of the key core use cases, so to speak, for the blockchain adoption as it today. We have a couple of other examples, one of them being the ports. I'll let Patrick chime in a little bit more in the next couple of slides on that particular use case. While the supply chain optimization is certainly the most commonly adopted use case, others such as trade finance and loyalty programs and rewards that are enabled by the tokenization of assets, which can largely support the post-digital support efforts, are also gaining mind share. Still in a nascent phase, but certainly opportunities. We have heard from some buyers in the APAC regions, those tokenization of assets being deployed. We know some instances in Europe, in Switzerland and Malta, some of the banks starting to participate and think and considering, how those use cases being applied. So there's beyond the supply chain, beyond trade finance, there's some other use cases go around. We're certainly aware, I want to put a flag here, that we're aware of the hype around cryptocurrencies. It's undeniable. And we are planning to provide some more time analyzing this form of blockchain in the fall of 2021 as part of the market landscape. But it's still a lot of we're trying to kind of go through the noise, through the hype, and see exactly what are the other use cases, where did they actually come from. There's the other portion of the use cases, and we think about how the use cases being developed. What we have heard from the buyer side, there is certainly a moment of so-called muted adoption of blockchain, but there's certainly factors that have to be accounted for, especially with the COVID outbreak that required customers to reprioritize budgets to maintain business continuity. The presence of blockchain alternatives that complement rather than replace the existing IT infrastructure, and obviously general lack of knowledge in the market. But as buyers are thinking about the next phase post-COVID and post those disruptions, vendors also need to be aware of how are they approaching the market, how are they actually thinking about who's involved in that market. So there's certain factors that vendors need to account for when it comes to introducing the use cases, introducing the new blockchain technology solutions, including solutions feasibility. If the solution is also being able to be integrated into the existing IT environment, as well as solution accuracy. As we think about the ecosystem of participants, as both Geoff and Evan mentioned, it's a community approach that requires for blockchain adoption. We see vendors like the management consultancies having that value propositions of becoming more the shepherds of all these community participants and knowing that business governance structure up front to be able to manage the coordination between both the solution offerings as well as the governance, as well as thinking about how to develop the next use case. Other use cases, that as we think about it, certainly the smart contracts that Geoff mentioned is another application that especially as part of the supply chain optimization. It can certainly enhance the transparency, but also lower the cost per transaction as it decreases that the need for human support. The technology can and will enable some smart constructs provided the business leaders actually can agree upon the business rules. That's certainly first and foremost. It's not about technology, it's about the business and people and change management, especially as business workers comply with those rules and independent and government auditors can properly revise the legislative policies to monitor the distributed ledger transactions following from those rules. So there's a lot of kind of a moving piece on the business side as we think about the use cases and we think about who's involved. And I just want to kind of put one more raise one more flag here on that particular area. When the vendors are thinking on embracing and embarking on those opportunities, they need to also account for the role of the procurement departments. Obviously, they're still highly involved in the decision making and where they fit into the on the spectrum of the community participant spectrum. So those are certainly certainly a role that cannot be ignored, especially as the blockchain enables parties to track down the origins of goods and communications without the worry of information being corrupted. The increased visibility may not appeal as much as all participants. That might be incentivized both legally and under the table or on sweetening deals when working with a supplier. So it's an important piece to account for as how each of the parties are involved and where they fit on the ecosystem. So vendors may have to embark on some additional risk as they're developing those production-ready solutions and build those use cases as we think forward. So again, a little bit of an overview of some of the implications, some of the applications of the use case around trade finance, like I said, around supply chain optimization, smart contracts. And I'll turn it over to Patrick to speak a little bit more about some more specific use cases that we have heard from some of the vendors. So Patrick, over back to you.
Thanks very much. So before we get to ports as a blockchain use case and kind of a test bed for a lot of the different emerging technologies, I want to talk through how real estate, climate change, sustainability, and providing trust have sort of all come together around a particular use case. So sustainability has become top of mind for a lot more companies. We saw this wave starting pre-pandemic, and maybe sort of everyone in the face of a global threat made some of those big ideas and those commitments a little more important. But the bottom line is, when it comes to sustainability, businesses continue to face challenges in providing or improving to clients and stakeholders and regulators that these efforts to address climate change actually have a measurable impact on the environment and are actually meeting these enterprise-wide goals. So we had a meeting, or got a briefing from KPMG, and they sort of understanding that need for proving the measurable impact and proving that you're meeting those goals. They told us about their thinking around deploying a blockchain solution as part of what they call the climate accounting infrastructure offering, climate accounting infrastructure, CAI. So essentially, verifying emissions data depends on trust, and trust gets built through sustained combination of different tools, including blockchain solutions, AI, enhanced IoT sensors, cloud. So KPMG was working with a client that wanted to meet its sustainability goals and prove to its investors, its clients, its regulators, essentially anyone and everyone, that they were meeting those goals. So they came up with this blockchain-enabled approach which they say provides near real-time climate accounting and reporting. Then they went beyond the one client and started to focus on a couple of industries, real estate and oil and gas, where increasing pressure around compliance, as well as structural challenges to meeting environmental demands and standards, make these industries sort of excellent initial targets for this particular blockchain-enabled solution. The specific blockchain component, according to KPMG, really comes through securing massive amounts of structured and unstructured data. When you think about all the different inputs to, are you meeting your sustainability goals, in a way that can actually be verified but not altered, leading to, of course, greater trust and transparency for all the parties. So why does any of this matter beyond it being an offering from KPMG around a particular area? So as you can see on the slide here, New York City, close to 70% of the carbon emissions come from the city's buildings. And there was a law passed in 2019 that introduces fines for owners of any building with more than 25,000 square feet who doesn't start making sizable cuts to their emissions by 2024. So roughly 50,000 buildings in the city are going to start needing to prove that they're making these tangible progress on cutting emissions. And that's the part that's so key. They're going to have to prove it because there's a law that says you got to prove it. And so it's pretty obvious then that a blockchain-enabled climate accounting tool would be a huge asset, not only for those building owners, but obviously it could be replicable in other cities, in other industries where the enterprises are on the hook for proving that they're actually living up to their sustainability goals. And if this sustainability momentum continues, that just means all the more opportunity for KPMG, but really any other consultancy or blockchain solutions provider that can come up with an answer to this how do I prove it kind of question. And now we'll talk about ports, and this is probably the oldest, the best known use cases for blockchain is around supply chain, but I still want to highlight it for a few reasons. So maritime ports are just an excellent use case for understanding the enabling power of blockchain, in part because of all the other emerging technologies that are deployed, the interconnections, the dependencies, the inherently multi-enterprise nature of a port itself. And the ports are probably my favorite use case for pretty much all emerging technologies for a couple simple reasons. First, every emerging technology has a distinct role to play. So you need IoT sensors on ships, literally in the channels, on the trucks, analytics to determine the most efficient processes and operations, as well as even predictive maintenance. You can use AR, VR if you want to get into training tugboat pilots without burning extra fuel, so we're back to sustainability again. Edge compute to make faster decisions, enable autonomous trucking, get the most out of the IoT devices and get to scale. And then, of course, there's blockchain to infuse trust into the larger ecosystem and expedite customs and the other trade processes. So ports, as Evan mentioned, are sort of at the nexus of supply chains. And so blockchain can fundamentally connect every element of the supply chain in a trusted, secure, transparent manner. We all know that. Every transaction traced and verified. Got it. Every step in the process potentially accelerated by eliminating human errors, and the manual record keeping. And this is back to some of what Geoff was saying. So if we zoom out to the bigger picture again, ports are both a contained ecosystem. There's a clear governing authority, and there's cooperation among partners and competitors, and that's because of a shared expectations and outcomes. Everyone wants the ships to load and unload as fast as possible and safely, with the right stuff going to the right people. And now we're back to what's the value of blockchain. And this part is really important. Ports are not fully contained ecosystems because of the various actors with significant interest in port operations, but are not in the daily ecosystem or even physically in the port. If you think of the government's interest in taxes and safety and traceability of goods, again, we're back to the value of blockchain. If you think of fire and rescue, who need to be able to get access to the port in an emergency, but they're not there all the time. The next mile, the last mile transportation links to people who are taking goods beyond the port. Again, blockchain as a key enabler there. All of these actors depend on the ports to operate well. And this is where there's a huge opportunity to grow for IT services vendors and consultancies to grow business, because they provide linkages through technologies and through their roles as the trusted advisor. So maritime playgrounds are like a playground, maritime playgrounds. Maritime ports are like a playground for emerging technologies within this massively complex ecosystem. And so that's sort of, my third reason for liking reports is that they can serve as a test bed for all these technologies, for the processes, for the change management, for all the challenges that enterprises face when they want to move towards scaled, smarter operations and smoother supply chains. So for IT services vendors and consultancies, then making sure they can articulate the value of blockchain and the opportunities that blockchain enables in sort of a semi-confined ecosystem. You prove you can do it in a small port, and then you can prove that you can do it at scale in a larger, more complex system, whether that's multi-enterprise, well, it would have to be multi-enterprise business networks, but in any more complex system beyond even what's at a port. I think we're going to continue to see use cases, Port of Rotterdam, Dubai ports. These are going to be deployed as sort of blueprints for accelerating blockchain adoption as an enabling technology to taking really digital transformation as a whole up to scale. So it's important that all the other emerging technologies are involved and make blockchain valuable. I recognize that's me being super optimistic. So let's pour some cold water on this, I guess, and we'll do another polling question, which I hope will work this time. And this question is pretty simple. When you think about the IT services and consulting vendors, top of mind for blockchain, you got some options there. Accenture, IBM, which if you know the port story, you know that they've been involved in that for really for as long as that's been one of the use cases. EY, KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, Atos, Capgemini, Dell. Who else do we have on here? Fujitsu, and of course, then there's always the option to say none of the above. And the reason we're asking this question now, in part, is because the next section that we're going to go over here is Boz is going to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the vendors and what's been happening with them. And we just wanted to get a sense of, okay, who is out there who's got a lot of attention now. So let us see what we got for results. This time, at least, there's a little variation, but again, I think we're having a problem with the presentation software here. IBM jumps right to the front, KPMG, because I just mentioned them. No surprise there. Again, I think we're having technical difficulties with the platform. That can happen. We'll move on now to Boz. Boz, you want to talk to us about the current buyer motivation?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's kind of like another part of that multi-enterprise buyer network framework. The buyers. And what I will go over here in the next slide is really about tying the buyer personas and thinking about what we have heard from our voice of the customer research and tie right back into blockchain and understanding how does that fit into the bigger, broader ecosystem when it comes to digital transformation, budget, spend, service lines, performance, and so forth. So couple of comments here to make really about, despite the pandemic and all the kind of related headwinds, digital transformation services usage increased across all service lines, from business consulting through IT implementation, application modernizations, compared to the pre-pandemic level, with the greatest jumps occurring into the business advisory and integration implementation services. The increase in responses using business advisory was somewhat a surprise initially, but then we started looking at it a little bit closer, understanding. So given the buyers that shifted their spend towards from the business awards and more technology-oriented solutions, so it was trying to better understand, okay, why a buyer's thinking about business advisory, when we realized it was about that business continuity that the spend was taking some presence. But at the same time, while the pandemic challenges create some advisory service opportunities around the business continuity, they also create headwinds for many enterprises that are more innovative around technology projects. The dynamics impacted the enterprise's planned proof of concept around blockchain, and resulted what we call it blockchain winter, with innovation teams deprioritizing the technology in favor of the more near-term requirements, especially as those catering to the firm's ability to support a remote workforce. And as you can see, blockchain here on the graph on the right kind of ranked towards the bottom half in terms of the technologies that support buyers' digital initiatives. But in spite of that fact, we believe that more mature buyers that are in true transformation stages are experimenting with the technology to optimize the supply chains and create some new channels for post-services support. Reaching scale, as we've been talking about so far in the presentation today, will require that broad-based buy-in from all parties, both internally and externally across the buyer's external ecosystem. We've observed, as part of our digital transformation research, a shift back and forth between grassroots to collaborative transformation within the enterprise, and COVID actually swung the pendulum back to the C-suite buyers, kind of like the full control gave back to full control to the C-suite buyers who sought to control the budgets more efficiently. No surprise there, but before COVID, the pendulum had swung back between grassroots and collaborative transformation. Now the C-suite is back in the budget control. With blockchain, though, continuing to originate largely within the engineering and innovation departments. That's where we see a lot of the ideas coming from today, a lot of use cases originating. The blockchain consultancies and providers will have the harder task convincing the business buyers to come forward and invest in emerging technology, especially if the adequate and functional alternatives are already in place. We know that very much buyers have been investing in cloud, in AI, in IoT, and so forth. So there's a lot of that, kind of like the economy of the buyers thinking about, okay, where do we go now? Cloud is certainly there. We got to invest to run the business, IT operations, optimization, and so forth. There's some use cases of blockchain, but can we do those in the same time? Is blockchain basically becoming the technology that is seeking for the problem, or there's a problem that blockchain can serve? So that's the big question that enterprises are trying to solve, and certainly the consultancies and service organizations are facing the challenge to make the case for investing in it. So the normalization of the emerging technologies, including, like I said, AI and blockchain and IoT within the business processes, will compel the buyers to seek support, no doubt, for those third-party vendors as they strive to automate the workflows at scale, which we believe will fuel some opportunities for vendors within the applications, modernization, migration, automation domain. So it's kind of like long tail managed services, with kind of, so to speak. With the digital transformation programs, we see that they're becoming increasingly complex due to the introduction of permeation of those emerging technologies. The need for greater collaboration across all parties is also increasing, especially as the new data sources create new entry points for learning and engaging with end customers. But that will happen only if buyers can flawlessly integrate and access cross-department data. So there's, again, a lot of moving pieces from a buyer side. Buyers are struggling, trying to prioritize their spend and how they see the initiatives that they want to invest. It varies by vendor, it varies by enterprise, especially when they come to vendor buyers that are more in the expansion phase versus buyers that are more in the transformation phase of the digital transformation program. So certainly there's some opportunities for vendors. We mentioned IBM with their role with the ports and that Patrick talked about just a moment ago. Another vendor I want to kind of highlight quickly here is Fujitsu, which launched a digital trust management technology, which provides additional security and visibility in the data ecosystem. The technology essentially analyzes the data that's transferred between the different agencies and firms to verify origin, previous transactions, and authorizes through the approval process and confirm the authenticity of the data. It's a technology that really helps Fujitsu drive their adoption for analytics and blockchain solutions. Again, that bringing back to that, not just technology for the technology's sake of blockchain on its own in the vacuum, but trying to see where some of the other technologies, how do they interact with each other, and where do they fit in this ecosystem. Fujitsu also furthered its investment in the blockchain technology through its partnership with Boostry. Through the partnerships, Fujitsu creates some connectivity for payments between different blockchain networks, using Boostry's IBAT platform, which really supports bonds and security transactions, as well as Fujitsu's blockchain infrastructure. So going back to that earlier comment on some of the use cases around finance, trade finance, and so forth. So I just want to kind of bring up Fujitsu as one example here on the large services providers as a vendor we have featured in the market landscape. So again, that's kind of like the pieces here on the buyer side. Buyers are a little bit of a hesitation at the moment, but there's certain buyers that may be ready to pull the trigger on a larger blockchain transformations, as long as vendors are able to make the use case and make really show where the ROI is coming from. Turn it back to the next slide, please. And really kind of to wrap up the presentation before we go into our kind of analyst sentiment discussion, as Patrick pointed earlier, I want to highlight real quick what we have included in this in the inaugural publications of the digital transformation blockchain market landscape. We talked about the introduction of the multi-enterprise business network, blockchain in the context of digital transformation. I kind of gave a couple of examples here, how we think about it, where does it fit from the buyer's priority in terms of spend, whereas maybe some of the opportunities for driving specific service areas like an application modernization services. Supply chain and financial services, ports, those are some of the use cases we talked about today, as well as some of the vendor highlights. I mentioned Fujitsu, we have IBM, we have EY, we have KPMG also mentioned in the report as well. We have other vendors sprinkled as examples throughout. So this is what we just published just about a week or so ago. In the next iteration, as I mentioned previously, we are looking to go a little bit deeper into the cryptocurrencies. Certainly something that we're not ignoring. We're gathering intelligence. We're trying to understand what is the real tangible impact on cryptocurrency. And in parallel with that, we'll be bringing up the role of government and the legislative in the sense of like those two, we believe, go hand in hand, and how the government, is likely becoming that linchpin for blockchain acceleration at scale. We'll continue to evolve our discussion around multi-enterprise business network, and we'll continue to feature vendors. And so it's all about understanding how vendors are investing, and obviously those investments will come from demand from the buyers, but also at the same time, vendors have to develop the use cases. So going back to that risk-sharing approach. So we'll continue to monitor the ecosystem, how it evolves, where the hyperscalers play in, where the startups fit in the equation, and so forth. So that's kind of for the 6 months from now, but again, next year and beyond, that's kind of the framework will continue to be around multi-enterprise business network, business value chain, technology chain, use cases, industry-specific discussions, and really about understanding how all these pieces together as we're trying to evolve, the TBR digital practice coverage, and again, rooted specifically in the vendor analysis. And with that, we'll turn over to soapbox discussion. Patrick?
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, the moment we've been waiting for here, the lightning round, the hot takes, the soapboxes, or we had it on the agenda as the very plain-sounding analyst sentiment. And the reason you're looking at these pictures here is because in preparing for this, Geoff made the comment that we were like a bunch of expert ping pong players knocking ideas around, and I don't think we are. I think one of us is playing ping pong, one's playing tennis, one's playing racquetball, one's playing squash. With that in mind, we're going to go in this order. Evan, you're first, and then Geoff, and then Boz, and then I'll wrap up. So Evan, give us your 2 minutes. Go.
Great, thank you. So throughout this presentation, we've heard of the potential applications of blockchain in a variety of industries and use cases. And like any emerging technology, it has gone through the waves of marketing hype, which have been accelerated in part by the growing awareness of cryptocurrencies. So it's our opinion that this awareness is almost convoluted what exactly blockchain is to many. It's funny, I was speaking with a friend yesterday who works for a defense contractor about this webinar, and his first reaction when I alluded to blockchain-enabled supply chain was, so it's just a way of paying people using things like Bitcoin. So to be fair, his technology expertise pertains to missile defense systems and tank turrets, but the confusion on the differences between blockchain and crypto has been elevated to the TBR team in the interviews we conducted with experts leading up to this report. In sum, it was expressed to us by some of these experts that they feel the hype around crypto has in some cases adversely affected blockchain interests by shareholders, such as those in the C-suite, because they lack the understanding of the technology and they confuse it with the currency byproduct. So confusion is one issue, but so too is the issue relating to a limited labor market of blockchain experts. In these interviews we conducted, a couple of respondents stated to us that the only people who truly understand the nitty-gritty technology behind blockchain are those who invented it or the startups who are the ones innovating it today. That in itself presents a significant challenge, as a multi-billion-dollar supply chain company like DHL may not be able to pallet the risk associated with replacing years and untold millions of dollars worth of IT spend with an emerging technology platform being championed by a startup. If I am risk-averse, which I am, funny enough, not, I would be wary of recommending we replace the old with the unproven new from the one-year-old startup. Lastly, how is a startup with limited resources going to accelerate buy-in from numerous participants to establish this ecosystem required for a commercially viable blockchain solution? I admit I'm pessimistic on the future in the near term of blockchain, but this pessimism has kind of been driven in part by some additional customer interviews we conducted, and Boz alluded to this earlier, around how COVID's kind of impacted the digital transformation priorities of these enterprise innovation labs. They've kind of pursued more near-term business continuity type of projects, and as a result kind of put an end to the blockchain pilots. With that being said, though, I do see a very real opportunity emerging as companies across the globe become more green in their approach to operations. And so, yeah, maybe early on the carbon reduction initiatives being articulated to the market might have been used as a marketing tool to appease consumers. But I think the Moonshot initiative, which is being carried out by Microsoft today, is a great example of how a leader in the industry is dedicating resources to pursue these reduction efforts, both internally and from their suppliers. And so to do this, they're going to need to explore new ways of using technology to kind of support this transparency with their supply chains. Specifically, as part of Moonshot, Microsoft updated its code of regulations for the suppliers, and they now require that they disclose their carbon footprint. While this information is then used by Microsoft to internally assign carbon taxes to the suppliers, which are used in the procurement process. And so, as such, this demands a solution which provides greater transparency between suppliers and procurers, solutions which Microsoft has already begun to explore atop Azure. In sum, if suppliers hope to continue working with Microsoft, they may be required to tie into a blockchain-based supply chain platform to provide that real-time information on their carbon usage and reduction progress. And I think I find it fairly hard to believe that any supplier would choose not to tie into that platform and risk losing supplier opportunities when one of the largest and most well-known technology players in the world. From Microsoft's angle, and this is more critical, is they can now establish a blockchain-based carbon tracking platform and ecosystem internally first, and then they have a very compelling offering to commercialize and provide to the market to other suppliers and entities out there who are also looking to reduce their carbon footprint, especially if governments begin to mandate carbon reduction and enact carbon tax policies. In sum, the challenges definitely remain. The potential value is certainly there, but only can the value be attained when the ecosystem exists. And with a potentially more optimistic view, we'll go to Geoff.
Yeah, it's odd for the old goat to be optimistic, but I am. From 2011 to 17, I felt we were at an economic pivot that I was trying to look for historical context. History may not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. And I was looking at Henry Ford's assembly line, then looking to the run-up to the Great Depression, thinking that was bad enough, but I've changed. I've shifted. I think we're at an economic pivot on par with what mechanization unleashed more than 200 years ago, and it's sort of lead up to what were the revolutions of 1848 in Europe, and quite frankly, the economic underpinnings of our Civil War. And yes, I think it is that profound. I genuinely do. I think the economic activity is shifting that dramatically under our feet right now. And I think distributed ledgers or blockchain are going to be the electronic red thread to tie all this together in due time. So, time and again, we say that it's not the tech, it's about the people and the process. Time and again, we say that digital transformation efforts only work if there's C-suite buy-in to get the troops lined up. And time and again, I say, government deploys a Sears delivery model in an Amazon world. The government is now in the way of getting these things done. Now it's twofold. And they're taking hits for all sorts of things, but it's twofold on this. Number one is middle-level personnel that are there to do the manual processes to establish trust and regulate and governance and compliance, et cetera, et cetera. They don't want to change their ways. They don't want to hear that they can do it with 10% of the staff they have now, because staff in bureaucracy leads to clout. So that middle management permafrost layer is in the way. And at the policy level, they don't know what they don't know. The average policymaker is my age and a lawyer, as opposed to my age and spending 40 years in technology. So this is why I put out a blog post about GSIs and their public sector activity. I think the road to broad-based technology adoption goes through the public sector. The ultimate C-suite is the regulators and the policy of the government under which you operate. So, government can cloud these things as well to a fairly well. I know for a fact, a tax and audit partner in 1986, I watched him file his extensions in all the states where his accounting firm did business because they were waiting to take their own customers to audit so they could get a better understanding of all the different rules that were changed in the 86 tax regulation. So think of what's coming with carbon taxes and all these other things that are in the pipeline. There's going to be a lot of changes. And we're talking about radically different business models. We're talking about a change in accounting practices, distributed ledger rather than general ledger that have been fairly static for 500 years. That's a lot of change to the structures and the trust institutions before we even touch upon crypto and CBDCs that can't even be fleshed out in 2 years, let alone in 2 minutes. So net, the public sector is the ultimate C-suite buy-in for broad-based blockchain adoption to happen. It's heating up. They don't know what they don't know. And the opportunity, the imperative is for the tax and audit folks to over-rotate into public sector advocacy, literally for the benefit of all of us.
Yeah,
so, okay, Boz.
Yeah, I'll continue here. Maybe a little bit more of something in between from a view perspective. And not surprisingly, adding the digital transformation hat on here. As I alluded earlier, digital transformation programs, they continue to mature. Buyers increasingly seek support from vendors with security, technical, and partner knowledge. But they also consider the need for solutions and processes with proper governance in place as they seek to develop more of a sustainable, what we call digital-ready business models. Vendors on that side have to really walk a fine line between establishing a long-term vision for the future of the business and directing clients where they take the first step towards achieving their goals. So initiatives move to scale, the way we see it, is the vendor's greatest value will come from integrating multiple initiatives together from a technology standpoint and helping clients improve the performance against the chosen KPIs. So vendors that can take advantage of buyers' increased investments in managed services to drive client stickiness and gain customer insights as part of the solution development feedback loop. So it's a matter of understanding how blockchain fits in those initiatives and how does it intertwine with the rest of the investments. One such investment that comes to mind, and certainly we heard from the discussions with some of the buyers that we conducted as part of the research, was the interaction between IoT and blockchain. With blockchain serving as that red thread that Geoff just mentioned, that stitching together societal elements together, the value of the technology is indisputable, in my opinion. However, it can also be seen as somewhat mistimed. So optimizing supply chains to blockchain appears to be the most immediate opportunity for the community participants that can take advantage of as the lowering transaction costs while accelerating speed to transactions and increasing visibility into the point of origin certainly elevates the trust among all the parties. And essentially it's trying to convert that ultimate the API economy becoming a blockchain economy, especially as the data remains the backbone of everything in logistics and supply chain, transportations, and other similar domains. So why IoT? IoT provides all this other, additional data, additional sensors that feeds into that blockchain economy, so to speak. So the IoT data can potentially be loaded onto the blockchain, which can further expand the ecosystem and accelerate the value of the sensors. But participants must be very, very careful not to overload the systems and mistake the granularity for visibility of the data, especially when considering merging IoT and AI data with blockchain. So there's an opportunity as long as the data and the systems are able to be connected well and not take advantage of the right data. So blockchain is about also right data and about connectivity with the broader ecosystem for digital transformation. Kind of a neutral view in a way, comparing to Geoff and Evan, but trying to raise some concerns, but also trying to bring some more opportunities that we see where blockchain might be applicable. Patrick?
Okay, because my colleagues can't do math and every single one of them went over 2 minutes, I'm going to be really fast. 3 things. 1, differentiation. I see this every time we talk to somebody who's in this blockchain space. We see EY and KPMG taking very different approaches to blockchain. We talk to startups that have their own, of course, niche thing that they're doing in blockchain. What's different about that is how differentiation is so hard to get in other spaces. There's not a whole lot of differentiation when it comes to cloud, when it comes to, honestly, edge, even IoT at some point, even analytics. Blockchain is an area where vendors, where consultancies are actually able to differentiate in their approach and what they're delivering. I think that's really important. Second thing, and everyone's sort of touched on crypto. We haven't talked about it a lot, and we're going to talk about it a lot in the fall. But one of the startups we talked to that basically said, look, blockchain is not going to get adopted until crypto gets adopted. That's going to be the driving force. It's not going to be supply chains. It's not going to be anything else other than crypto. I can't believe that, and I can't believe that because the fundamental value of blockchain is in digitizing trust, and right now there's just not a lot of trust around crypto. Maybe that's going to change, maybe it isn't. I don't know. I just don't think so, and I don't think it's going to be crypto. I'm much more inclined to listen to Geoff and believe that the government as the ultimate C-suite is what's going to essentially enforce adoption of blockchain. And then the last point, and this gets back to my talk about ports and supply chain and all that, and this is where maybe I'm a little more pessimistic than I should be. I've literally have the physical copy of the May-June issue of Foreign Affairs sitting on my desk here, and the headline is Trade Wars, the Fight Over the Global Economy's Future, and there's a picture of 20-foot containers with barbed wire. 5 essays. I've read the first 4, not one mention of blockchain, and this is about trade wars and the future of the global economy. So if the great big thinkers aren't thinking about it right now, it's going to be really hard for it to get adopted anytime soon. So that's my, I guess, a little bit more pessimistic than I expected to take, but at least I got it in under 2 minutes. So we got a ton of questions. We don't have a lot of time. We'll get through these as quick as we can. First question, do you see vendors bringing blockchain offerings to clients as standalone solutions or as part of a larger digital transformation engagements? Boz, that's you.
Yeah, I kind of agree. That's a good question. I think it goes back to my sentiment a moment ago, really about the use cases are needed to develop, but the use cases of the blockchain solutions as a standalone needs to account for all the rest of the technology. So some of the vendors that are investing in blockchain are starting to think a little bit more strategically and starting to consider it like, okay, there's some implications that a blockchain addresses that Patrick pointed earlier about KPMG and EY we mentioned and so forth. But they're also starting to account for all the other moving pieces from the digital transformation. So if they have not started thinking about the implications and the connectivity with the rest of the technologies, they're going to, because that's the only way the blockchain can go to scale.
Thank you, Boz. So last question here, and it's going to go, I think we maybe all can touch on it real quickly. What do you see as the biggest risks going all in on blockchain? What are the biggest hurdles? What are the biggest obstacles? Geoff, why don't you go first, then Evan, and then Boz.
Well, the biggest risk will be the sunk cost, right? That's the biggest risk. But I would also argue the biggest risk is fear of being left out if you're not ready to take advantage of it. So that sunk cost may just have a longer ROI to it without it. Hurdles, getting the ecosystems built up. Obstacles, government policy regulations. Over, back to you.
I guess my risk would just be a little different, where it's just like, you see investors gambling on whether Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever crypto is going to be the currency of the future. You're going to have that same type of gamble on whatever supply chain platform, be it from PwC, IBM, whoever it launches one, is going to be the ecosystem enablement tool of the future too. If you make the wrong bet and you have to go now replace the initial investment with the one that wins in the market, then that's a large risk for you, and if you're the IT head.
For me, the biggest risk will be about missing the mark on establishing data standards, as other parties have to get on board. So if there's no data standards for data interoperability, it will be really hard for vendors and buyers to use the right data when it comes to blockchain.
And I'll finish up by agreeing with Evan. I think if you're Betamax in a VHS world, then that's going to be the biggest problem, the biggest obstacles for adoption. So with that, we will end this webinar. Thank you all very much for attending. And please reach out to us directly if you have follow-up questions, you want to get in touch with us about this, and if you want to see the blockchain market landscape that we just published. So again, thank you all very much. Take care and talk to you next week.